Up next on Authentically Detroit, we're going to be talking about Juneteenth. What is it? Why is it important in the telling of the story of our freedom? But first, what we're reading from the Michigan Chronicle. Today, Mary Sheffield, Detroit's mayor, endorsed Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson for Michigan governor. Keep it locked. Authentically Detroit starts after these messages.
Interested in renting space for corporate events, meetings, conferences, social events, or resource fairs? The Stoudemire Wellness Hub and Mass Detroit Small Business Hub are available for rental by members, residents, businesses, and organizations. We offer rentals for activities such as corporate events, social events, meetings, conferences, art classes, fitness classes, and more. To learn more about our rentals and reserve space, visit ecn-detroit.org/space rental.
What's up, Detroit? Welcome to another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from Detroit's East Side at the Stoudemire, inside of the East Side Community Network. I'm Sam Robinson.
And I'm Donna Davidson.
We want to thank you so much for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices for real people in the city of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on all platforms. It's just Donna and I today. Donna, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
All right.
We want to run down some of this week's top headlines in the city of Detroit, starting off with the news of the day. Detroit Mayor Mary Sheffield has endorsed Jocelyn Benson. Now, there was a period of time when we were wondering how this was going to happen, when this was going to happen. I kind of figured that it would happen after Mike Duggan took himself out of the race. There was a WWJ reporter there that sort of pressed Mary on that dynamic itself. Obviously Duggan endorsed Mary Sheffield. There was not a lot of expectation that it was a reciprocal endorsement. I don't think Duggan himself thought that she would come back and endorse him. And that was sort of new in Duggan's sort of, king-making or just the way he operates. I just watched Mary Waters, the at-large city council member, sort of have to bring Duggan up in interviews and say, well, don't count out Mike Duggan when Jocelyn Benson would be brought up. Don't count out Mike Duggan. When I reported on that, their team did not like that. They refuted and rejected that they were stumping for Duggan. But it was true, Mary, that you were endorsed by Duggan for your congressional run last year, and as we know in the public, when Mike Duggan does something to help you out, typically it comes with a favor. And Mary got helped out by Duggan. I mean, did the endorsement really matter? Duggan endorsing the final minute of that campaign.
Mary Sheffield won with 77% of the vote. And the polls were pretty much declaring that kind of victory. So that's like me endorsing the fact that it's Monday. At some point when you know it's going to happen, it doesn't have political weight. It would have had more political weight had he endorsed her earlier in the process.
Yeah.
He did not. And I think, when it comes to Mary Sheffield endorsing Jocelyn Benson, at this point, it's pretty much a no-brainer. Jocelyn Benson's a Democrat, Mary Sheffield's a Democrat, and there is no spoiler in the race anymore. But I just have to be honest with you and say I'm glad there's not. I'm glad that people don't have to feel like they're trying to choose between somebody who, for whatever reason, they remain loyal to, and a person who is actually going to be in Lansing helping to fight against some of the gross injustices that a lot of us fear. Right now, the support has consolidated under one person, and so I think it's also safe to say that Mary Sheffield endorsing Jocelyn Benson is about as significant as somebody saying it's Tuesday. At this point, it goes without saying that this is where her supporters are going to line up if they show up at the polls.
It was interesting. It was a senior home event, and so a lot of those seniors have seen Mary. They were wearing their Mary Sheffield for Mayor campaign T-shirts. Not a lot of people knew Jocelyn sort of by title. A lot of people have seen her, knew of her, but when you talk to some of these folks living in the senior home, they weren't aware of exactly what she did. There was one gentleman that went up to her and said, "Are you the news reporter?" And she goes, "No, I'm the Secretary of State." And so, I do think the idea of 83 campaign offices in all 83 counties, referring to her, it's just the Secretary of State branches having her name on it. I don't think that is, you can say that as
important.
A campaign office.
It's important. I'm not suggesting. I mean, it's important that she has the endorsement. It's important for people to know things. But the reality is, I think that right now there was really no alternative to Jocelyn Benson, and people don't know who the Secretary of State is. I mean, she has not been in the news as Secretary of State as much as you've seen the governor or even the Attorney General in the news.
Right.
She's one of 3 women who was elected to the statewide office in that, all women kind of tripartite leadership. Mm-hmm. And she was the 3rd who kind of faded in the background in a lot of people's eyes. Now, she's been in the news lately.
She has. I mean, she has been racking up these endorsements. The UAW endorsed her along with Abdul Sayed last week, ruffled some feathers. Of course, the Detroit News is going to talk to the auto workers for Trump guy that will say that he's a communist socialist. And so Mary today said that she has known Jocelyn since she became an elected official and has always had a good relationship with her. They talked about preemption stuff. They talked about, Mary said, in my first 6 months of governor or as mayor, I've I've been reminded how important it is to have strong leadership in Lansing. I don't know if that was a sideswipe to Matt Hall, who I know that Mary has tried to be, a player with. Doesn't really seem like Matt Hall wants to play ball at all.
There's this, I'm going to work both sides of the aisle and make them listen to me. And then there's reality.
Right.
The reality is that there's absolutely no desire on part of many of these people who are in the Republican Party right now to, and there hasn't been in a long time, to sort of, meet in the middle. This fictitious middle that does not exist. Matt Hall is not close to where Governor Whitmer is, or even where the state Senate is. He is, he wants to abolish property taxes. He's trying to negotiate a better deal and doesn't want to open the bridge. Yeah. He's so far away from a center that any politician who wants to believe they're going to be able to negotiate with both sides is not either being honest or they've got some skills I don't know about.
And it was so interesting to me last year, Donna. I don't think I've shared a lot of these thoughts, I guess, sentiments, reflections, observations that I have. Duggan, as the independent governor candidate, brought Matt Hall to the Detroit Police Headquarters to do a press conference with Alibas Farhat and Karen Whitsett and others about, the supposed public safety trust fund that was supposed to pay for CVI, which didn't even have the money in the earmark initially. And so I remember a week before, maybe a couple weeks before, Matt Hall standing in front of Todd Bettison. And I've talked to Todd Bettison about this. He feels like, he doesn't want to get mixed up on one side of the political aisle or the other. I think a lot of that was just saving face for Mike Duggan. Not sure if I would ask him now how he felt about that. But, Duggan had Todd Bettison standing behind Matt Hall as he was decrying woke policies, DEI policies, while he was decrying, the woke second chance, legislation for inmates who perhaps have served their time and deserve to be free back with their families. A lot of what Detroiters, especially those CVI guys that you talk to, advocated for, Matt Hall, not only just completely opposed it, but treated it as if it was some sort of like radical black. And to see Todd Bettison standing behind Matt Hall, Todd, of course, was standing next to several other sheriffs.
I think that
police, law enforcement
history
officials
will not be kind to Mike Duggan, because I don't think he was honest about so many things. One of the things he was not honest about was he was not really running as an independent. He was running independent Democrat. He was running as an independent Republican in many ways. He had a Republican deputy mayor. He had the alliance with Matt Hall. He had the support of Karen Whitsett. And he had some alliances, which, quite frankly, and a lot of the things he said, and I think that there was a really good article that came out of the Michigan Chronicle that detailed the distance between where Mike Duggan was and the Democratic Party. He was using a lot of the talking points of Republicans. And that's okay to say that you're a Republican, and yes, you were mayor of Detroit, and everybody thought you were a Democrat, and, when Biden was your guy, you seemed like it. But he said things like, I haven't been comfortable with the Democratic Party for a long time. And so it seems as though his allegiances were there. And I'm very thankful that I don't have to care about his politics anymore, and that we can really focus on the people on the ticket, because it made me upset when people would sometimes give him a pass and not see him for who he was, because he wasn't being deceptive. It was almost as though he was taking for granted the fact that he had been mayor of Detroit, and that was going to translate into trust. And for those of us who actually looked at his record as mayor of Detroit, there were a lot of unanswered questions, but even his approach to running for governor raised a lot of concerns with people who were looking for a more just state. We're not going to even talk about Republican or Democrat. But even regardless of how you label yourself, either you believe that Joe Biden won, or you believe that Detroit's election results were falsified. When the mayor of the biggest city in Michigan is standing alongside people who are still perpetuating, election fiction, it makes you wonder, well, wait a minute, Mr. Mayor, were you also elected via election fiction? If we can't trust Detroit results, maybe we should not trust that you were mayor 3 terms. And there are people who don't. So I'm glad we don't have to talk about him. I mean, we are talking about him, but I'm glad that he is no longer a player in the process.
It is interesting. The Mary Sheffield sort of represented the perhaps shifting tides. The way that Michigan media, members of our media, would talk about Duggan as if he was, the most important part of the Democratic Party and the central kingmaker, operator, player. Perhaps as he closed the chapter on his gubernatorial candidacy, we see that that's not the case.
Well, the significant thing is I really do think that there are many people who thought that Mike Duggan was going to be able to take Republican policies. He was going to be one tough nerd, just like Snyder, and take Republican policies under the banner of independence. I believe he pulled out of the race, and I've said this before, not because of the fact that Democrats were losing confidence. I think he pulled out of the race because there was a poll that showed he was drawing more heavily from the Republican ticket than from the Democratic ticket. And his support dried up because his job was to draw support from the Democratic ticket. And the reality is, the worse things got, the more people were willing to be partisan and say, you know what, even people who liked him, I can't support anybody who's going to not stand on our side and fight with us. I think that's what happened to him. He had Republican support. If you look at the people who supported him, you look at where his money came from, you look at who his initial endorsers were and the people who are most favorable to him, you're going to see people who like this, who have a Republican mindset. Maybe not a MAGA Republican mindset. I'll give him that. But it doesn't matter because
certainly not that.
Because even if you're not a MAGA Republican, the Republican brand is MAGA. The Republican brand did not stand out and say we should not have USC fighting on the on the White House lawn, that all of this stuff is desecrating the image of America in the rest of the world. It's embarrassing. It looks like, somebody's redneck backyard in the White House lawn.
And it was really interesting to me as a reporter working with Duggan's campaign, seeing people that I had worked with on the Kamala Harris campaign, like Mario Moro Jr., people that I had worked with in sort of like a conservative Republican sense, like Andrea Bitely. She is a longtime staffer, used to work for Bill Schuette. And Andrea was the spokesperson who Duggan ended his campaign with. Andrea is a person that says, I'm a Republican that voted for Kamala Harris. I think a lot of Republicans would say once you do that, you give up your right to be a Republican. And so that's a lot of his supporters and his most ardent believers were these sort of defected conservatives that felt like, the Democratic Party was going in a insane leftward direction with the rise of people like Abdul or Zohran Mamdani.
The party that's going in the insane direction has really changed direction has been the Republican Party. And so what they talk about is woke politics, but you're talking about a president who has violated every tenet of faith that we have in the American system. You're talking about a president who put his name on the Kennedy Center, for example, because he just wanted to. And even though that violates, the law, and you have judges saying this is in violation of the law, people aren't really doing anything about it. You're talking about a president who is spending all of these millions of dollars building a ballroom without any approval and, hosting a UFC tournament and then comparing it to the Empire State Building. You're talking about a president who's doing things that are so against the grain, whether it is the violation of I get some things I can't pronounce, is it endorsements or something like that, where you cannot enrich yourself. And he has enriched himself and his family members brazenly, nakedly, unapologetically. And yet people want to talk about the radical left for things like we don't believe in genocide, or we believe in health care, or we believe that people should not be going broke in college. The idea that these ideas are so far left as if they're brand new is only makes sense in the context that the other party is going so far right that anything short of, we hate DEI is woke. And it's woke is not even a word or a movement. It's a slang word. Stay woke. And they actually have turned this into public policy. Mm-hmm. They've taken Black vernacular English and turned it into public policy. There's no policy behind woke or wokeism. But let's not talk about him anymore. I breathed a sigh of relief and I celebrated the day that he was no longer politically viable. And like I said, I don't think history is going to be kind to him. And
I want everybody to know that, might not be as close to all this. We knew that he was not viable. Like, it was an open sort of like, okay, is he even going to make it past July? Like, is he even going to make it to the primary? And I was on this side of, and I'll tell you guys, bring you behind the curtain. No, like I would sort of assume with the other staffers of the other gubernatorial candidates that Mike Duggan was not going to, because he had no shot. Like the polling wasn't there, and just you could tell the people weren't there. I'm on people. I talk to people and I say, hey, what do you know this person? And so not enough people knew that he was running as an independent. Not enough people just knew at all. He had the money, he had the billboards and everything, but no, there was no shot that Duggan was going to be governor. And not to say that there was no shot at all. I think he answered why that there was no shot, because there's not a national network of independents that uplift and boost and spend on each other like there are for Democratic and conservative candidates.
He was there as a spoiler. In my opinion, sometimes people run as spoilers. They don't think they're going to win. And the question is, who benefited? He ran. Maybe he thought he could win. Maybe his ego.
I think he did. And I will say,
But I think that there are people who supported him not because they thought he could win.
Well, sure, because they opposed Jocelyn Benson.
Supported him because they did not want to see another Democrat in the governor's mansion, and they figured he could siphon off Democratic votes because Black people would just, roll over and vote for him. I think it was a strategic investment, a strategic level of support for people, not necessarily Mike Duggan. Mm-hmm. You have to be very careful when you are in a leadership role. I don't care what your leadership role is. Don't believe the headlines, okay? You're not great. You're a human being. You are flawed. You are available. But the higher you rise, the more people around you create this bubble where they treat you as though somehow you are unlike other human beings. He's not going to be the first. I remember he'd say things like, yeah, bring it on. I can't wait till they do negative campaigning. They're doing my campaigning for me. The cockiness that came out of him speaks to the fact that he's surrounded by people who really believe this.
Yeah, they did. Oh, I think they did. And he said the day that he ended, he did not, he says, I did not run to be a spoiler. I think him poking at Jocelyn, obviously he wasn't, well, I guess he was on stage with several other Republicans, never John James. And I guess just this whole Republican primary now with John James and
you just
Perry
talked
Johnson
about him and Matt Hall on stage together before he ran. I mean, the reality
I'm
is,
saying like he couldn't have really played a spoiler for a Republican candidate. Which is, I mean, we were feeling like his support was coming from Republicans, right? Like it wasn't coming from Black Detroiters in the neighborhoods, and that's something that Lansing like perverted on us. Do you know that? Like I had to hear so many of my old Lansing journalists be like, "Well, the people in the Detroit neighborhoods love Duggan," and I'm just like,
that's because of the way the news
no, they don't.
That's the way the news gets reported. When
It
you
does.
win 70% of 15% of the vote or 16% of the vote, that is not a mandate. But I don't know if you recall when he won the last time, he said, "I have a mandate." And again, I encourage everybody, when you move into leadership roles, to pray for yourself and to remember and to bring humility to the task. Understand you're there by the grace of God, and you can be removed by the grace of God. You are not infallible. You're not this person who can do all things. I think there's a person in charge at the federal level who's going to see that soon. Because I think people want to run as though somehow there's the rhetoric. Oh, look, this white man won, and therefore he's not unlike other white men, and he can do all things, through Christ's Lord who strengthens him. But the reality is that he's a human being, and that human being was running up against housing shortages, running against voters just giving up, running against a lot of things that were happening in the community that people were dissatisfied with. He wasn't listening to them, and neither was his inner circle, but you and I were. And if you're in the hood enough, you understand that people did not have those impressions. They say pride goes before the fall. We'll see how history treats somebody, because sometimes it's like the Wizard of Oz, and they pull back the curtain and there's a man standing there just like we thought. Let's talk about the Census Bureau. Speaking of Mike Duggan, here's something. He says, if I don't grow the population by 2020, I should be fired. I should not be reelected. 2020 comes and goes. He loses population. He sues and says, oh, no, I didn't really lose population. Strangely, the census undercounts people in Detroit. Therefore, I should be given these extra people. And after he's out of office, he finally finds out that even that was lost. But, where was the accountability? You said you were going to grow the population. Two things. One, you were growing downtown population and neighborhoods were emptying out in a lot of places because of policies like tax foreclosures and the failure to invest in a lot of neighborhoods because you have strategic neighborhoods where you're putting all your investments. What did you think was happening in the other neighborhoods? Number two, that's number one. Number two, you have a lot of people who felt like the government was not investing in their neighborhoods. And the argument the city was making was fill out the census because Detroit is going to lose money. Well, if you don't think the money that Detroit is generating is going to help you and your family, why would you care? So it's very possible that a lot of people chose not to be counted because they didn't care, because they didn't feel connected to the outcomes or the fate of the city. I was at a Rise Higher Detroit press conference earlier today. I actually spoke at it. And we talked about the polling that was done and getting out in the neighborhoods and talking to people and having over 8,000 people fill out polls and 1,200 people show up at meetings. In those instances, the people who fill out the polls, the people who are heard, feel like government is listening to them. Now you go back and say, fill out this census form. And my theory of change is, although I can't prove it, that more people are willing to fill it out when they believe government is connected to them. And so the news media kind of blew past it. Well, you know what? There's maybe an undercount. And the courts said no. And by the way, he's not the first big city mayor to say that people are undercounted in the city. That's all of the time. Even before, when people were losing population, there are people who said there was an undercount. The undercount didn't start with Duggan. And so, yes, there is an undercount that happens inside of cities, but you did not say, if I lose population based on a corrected count that I make, I should leave. You said if I lose population. He lost population. It's growing now. They say it's growing certainly in some, corridors. But
and it's 3 straight years of growth. The latest census estimate was 5,060 residents were added in 2025. There's a lot of talk about Detroit's actual.
What is the percentage?
Population.
5,060. That's less than 1%, and I just want to point that out.
Yes. Oh, yes. That is.
He lost more than 1%.
Certainly did. The city of Detroit, it's contested. A lot of experts feel like there's more than are counted. I've spoken to a handful of, 3. Spoken to 3 U.S. Census Bureau counters, independent of one another. 2 of them knew each other, but one of them had no idea who the other people were when I asked. And I always like to find them out, and they'll be in your neighborhood, knocking on your door, and I've seen them a couple of times in a car, and I stop my car because these individuals have really, really, they're like the experts on the ground Detroit population, right? And so what do all these 3 people have in common? They believe that Detroit is wildly undercounted by a tune of hundreds of thousands. Like I met a woman that thought at any given time in Detroit, every single day, there are over 800,000 people. She said, I would guess there's about 835 people that exist in Detroit every day. Maybe not from 11 to 6 a.m., at night.
Yeah, the thing is that people say all kinds of things.
They do.
We know that urban populations are historically undercounted. We know that when you have people afraid of deportation, they're going to be undercounted.
Yes.
We know that when you have people doubling up in houses that they don't own and they cannot be there legally, they're going to be undercounted. And we know that people living on the streets are going to be undercounted.
Yeah. That legal number is 649.95.
Undercounting is a feature of the census in urban communities, and it was made worse by mass deportation. Can you imagine what it would be if they started counting now with all these people hiding, pretending like they're not here?
Right.
But what you can't say is that undercounting is a new phenomenon.
Sure.
It's been going on. Now, it may have been worse, and certainly when the census was done, we were in the midst of a pandemic. So lots of places were undercounted. In 2020, you had these electronic census taking methods, which were different. But do I believe Detroit's population shrank? Yes. Mm-hmm. Do I believe that there were whole blocks and apartment buildings that were vacated? Yes. You know why? Because I saw things that were happening inside of the community. And we've built up a lot of residences in Detroit, but a lot of those residences are not 100% occupied. The final thing I want to say on this matter is we build up a lot of residences to attract individuals. You build up a studio and you gain one person who may or may not claim to live here because they don't want to pay car insurance and taxes in Detroit. You lose a family in a neighborhood and you lose 4 people. So for every one person you bring in, you're losing 4. And that's the math the city wasn't looking at when the city decided not to invest in every neighborhood. I got here in 2016 and met with everybody in Duggan's administration, sharing my concern that strategic neighborhoods, by putting all of the resources in, at that time, 7 neighborhoods, were going to deprive other neighborhoods of the ability to hold on. I said, in 10 years' time, things are not going to be the same. They're going to be worse. Mm-hmm. And they threw up their hands and say, well, that's the way the cookie crumbles. Like, who cares? Right. And so I'm glad that we're growing a little bit, but I hope that we grow in a way that means that families can stay, that means that neighborhoods will be repopulated or at least stop losing population, and people who feel invisible can feel counted in the city of Detroit, because the census is not when you should be counted. You should be counted when your needs exist and you call the city council and you say, I need something done. And the city responds. When you say there's a dead tree on my house and the city fixes it. When you say there's a broken sidewalk in front of my house and it's done, or a wild dog. There's so many times when you should be counted, but when the only time you count is when there's a census, you're going to have an even worse undercount.
Mm-hmm. Census Bureau is something that the city of Detroit has been fighting with in courts for some time. You can read about the county cap rule. Dana Afana of the Detroit Free Press has a wonderful explainer on what happened last month in front of the district court judge in the fight to get the Census Bureau to stop using the county cap rule in its population counts. Now, the city had a few successful lawsuits against the Census Bureau, but Tricia Stein, the city's senior director of strategic initiatives, told the Free Press that the city is disappointed by the ruling, and remains that the Bureau has been systematically undercounting the population of the city of Detroit. Now, why is the population of our city important? Well, because it determines how we are represented in Congress, determines our federal funding, earmarks at the state level as well. And so, yeah, it's important, guys, to count yourself on the U.S. Census Bureau. If you ever have some of those folks come into your house, you know.
Yeah, so there'll be another census in the year 2030. Between now and 2030, they're updating the census. But what I will say is that city leadership plays a large role in people showing up. People want to know that when there's HUD dollars coming in, they come into your neighborhood. The funny thing is, no matter where you live in Detroit, your property tax and your income tax rates are exactly the same, no matter where you live in Detroit. But in some neighborhoods, you get more services. And so there's this feeling that some people have that if I attract more money into the city and there's no plan to spend it in my neighborhood, we have a problem. I was at an evening meeting on the east side of Detroit. I believe it was in 2017. It was a long time ago, but I don't remember the year. And it was at a church on the east side of Detroit, and city council invites people up. And person after person walked up to the microphone, and they said, when are you going to get to my neighborhood? And they said, well, there's just not enough money. You have to understand there's not enough money. And I really wanted to stand up, but I had to get on a plane, so I had to leave early. I wanted to stand up and say, so if there's not enough money to fix up this neighborhood, do they have to pay taxes? If you're not investing on their block, should they pay the same taxes as people whose homes get investment? It just isn't fair. And so, again, it shows up in how people show up at the polls, in the census, and every other kind of thing. And I am hopeful that we have a leader in our city right now who is committed to doing a better job. It's not going to be perfect, but a better job at making sure that people all over the city feel like they are being heard and represented and believe there's, remember she said she's going to fix sidewalks in every neighborhood? Unheard of.
She's on my neighborhood. I already got some new sidewalk, actually.
Yeah, but that's unheard of. Do you know how long it's been since somebody said we're going to do something in every neighborhood in the city of Detroit?
Which is funny because literally I'm like, I'm checking on Gary Brown to fix my water, but there's Mary with the sidewalks right on Nottingham, right across from Somerset. So, yeah, and it's like literal. I was like walking down one day. I was like, the city workers. I was like, oh, this is the new sidewalks? They're like, yeah. I'm like, oh, wow, this is good. Gary Brown, we need your help on Somerset, man. Lake Somerset. We need a vacuum. We need a water department, a sewage department to come out with a vacuum. And it affects all kinds. You could really just write a headline. And this is the thing that, not having news journalists in a community, there was a shooting on Somerset last week on Thursday. Did you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. And it was my neighbors,
yeah.
And the little kid got shot in the head. I'm like, oh my God. There's little kids that play outside right across from My house, the policeman knocked on my door to see if I had seen anything because apparently after the shoot, there was a shootout. And then apparently one of the guys like drove right past really fast and then crashed out. But they hadn't arrested anybody, so I guess he just crashed out of his car and then ran off. The lack of news journalism that exists in neighborhoods of Detroit, which I'm like legitimately thinking like how many actual journalists, and I've stayed on this topic for a while, when it comes to violent crime and seeing how the community violence interventionists work, that's like there's great value to being right there, right? Like this is my second time that I've witnessed that community sort of in shock and in a grieving period, people yelling and screaming because they're in shock over what just happened. People consoling one another. I mean, the Detroit police has a whole process of corralling everybody and keeping media where they, contained. I saw Lauren Edwards. She used to be a Fox 17 reporter. She's at Fox 2 now. Park her Fox 2 van right outside my house, and their lights that were lit up, the Fox 2 van, they just leave it on, and anybody could really just drive it off. I shouldn't say that on the air probably, but they leave it. And so I'm like sleeping in my house on Thursday, sort of well into the afternoon. Didn't hear the gunshots, but I did hear somebody knock on my door. I go downstairs, and somebody's knocking on my door. I see Lauren Edwards coming out of her Fox 2 van, and I go up to her and I say, "Are they here for the water?" No, Sam. No. The news is not here for the water. I did see a Channel 4, I forget the gentleman's name, the reporter's name, but he did a one-off on a senior's puddle that exists right outside of her driveway. And I thought to myself, does this Channel 4 news reporter, that's probably not from here, I don't know if he is or not, but does he know that he could just do a headline, "The East Side is underwater every time it rains"? Gary Brown saying out loud, I lose sleep every time it hard rains. Me too, Gary Brown. The resources, and we don't know. I don't know. Interfacing with Letitia Johnson's office, they're well aware of these issues, right? And so it really is up to the water department to come out, and they're not going to do it. And I do wonder if I should just take matters into my own hands and just show up to city council and make a big deal, or just continue to write about it and report and observe on it publicly in the way that I do. But it is very frustrating, isn't it? It's like, guys, this is not an issue in other places where, there's seemingly an abundance. And I don't know if it really is the lack of resources that they're not able to come vacuum my thing out every time it rains.
I think it is also allocation of resources. I think that the city does have some finite funding issues. I think the city does have to prioritize because there's not enough money. I think the city spends money on some other things that maybe the city doesn't have to spend money on. But yeah, there's some neighborhoods that would never get to that.
Yes.
I want to change direction just a little bit. I want to talk about the Mop Up Michigan law.
Yeah.
Because for Michigan Money Out of Politics is an initiative which the executive director of Voters Not Politicians co-chairs. And a lot of money and effort was spent getting over 560 ballots to the Election Commission for them to evaluate whether or not it can go on the ballot. And there's a lot of concerns about what's going to happen. So I just want to talk about something that I learned about that I think is important for people to understand. One of them is that there could be a constitutional fight. And we expect there to be a constitutional fight where people who are representing organizations or companies say that's not fair. The Mop Up Michigan restricts what regulated monopolies can do, but also corporations that have large contracts with the state can do. Their leaders have less ability to influence the state politics. And so what some people are saying on the right is that, or some of the opponents are saying, is that restricts free speech because, as you know, in America, money and speech are the same exact thing. But But so you have the constitutional fight that we anticipate. You have the questions about whether every signature is going to pass. Mm-hmm. But the thing a lot of us don't really think about is adopt and amend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to talk about 2018 when One Fair Wage put an increase in minimum wage and an increase in tipped wage on the ballot by getting enough signatures. What the legislature was able to do was to adopt that as legislation before there was a vote. When you adopt it as legislation before the vote, then you basically supplant that vote. The vote no longer happens, right? And so what happened with One Fair Wage is they adopted the minimum wage law. Voters didn't have a chance to vote on it, and then they amended the law to lower the minimum wage. It's very possible that we are also fighting adopt and amend at this Michigan mop-up initiative. So as we're looking at candidates for people who support that initiative, finding out where people stand on that. If you stand and you support it now while you're campaigning, the likelihood that you will support it while you're in office is much greater. But Michigan would not be a trailblazer in this legislation. We're actually behind a lot of states in the nation in the way that we regulate corporate spending in our state. And I think it's important that we understand what's happening to benchmark it and also really hold our legislators accountable for doing the right thing. The good news is the Michigan House and Senate don't get along about anything. They can't pass a budget. They can't agree on many, many things. And so I don't think they would come together on this. When you had adopt and amend with the minimum wage law, you had a Republican state Senate and a Republican House. Mm-hmm. Right now, that division kind of protects us somewhat.
Yes, it does. It disallows anybody from doing anything. We are back in our sort of do-nothing legislature as we were before the trifecta.
First do no harm. And when the intent is harmful, then to a certain extent, do nothing until we can replace some of these idiots is a way that some people may think makes sense. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. I know that you have your predictions about what's going to happen at the state level. I don't know if they've changed with the whole mood of the country, but, I don't know what's going to happen. But if for some reason, either we got a Republican governor and more Republicans in the state legislature or a Democratic governor and more Democrats in the House, things in Michigan could be dramatically different in 2027.
They could, yes. It's an important election. I don't know if I want to say the most important of your lifetime. I'm sure some politicians will be deploying that line. However, it's interesting. Duggan, at the end of his press conference, had acknowledged that the headwinds are on the left side. He acknowledges that
he acknowledged two things:
the reality that people want to vote for Democrats.
Well, he acknowledged in such a limited way. He said, "Well, look, the war with Iran drove up gas prices. Therefore, the headwinds are with the Democrats." He didn't acknowledge all of the other things pushing the wind in that way, because again, Duggan does not have a policy disagreement with all of the anti-DEI. Obviously, he's anti-woke too. He didn't have an issue with mass deportation, rollback of environmental protections, or any of the other things, or even the big, beautiful bill that's going to cut off Medicaid and food access in 2027, where the legislature tried to coyly push it until after this midterm election.
You wonder what would a Duggan that would have just remained in the Democratic Party and been anti-Trump looked like in this, because it was a political calculation that Republicans would have a sort of a moment. You remember they did have a moment that ended very quickly after Donald Trump started to be the president.
You can wonder that. But
that was 2024 that he left the Democratic Party,
okay,
December of.
Yeah, but I mean, he had his deputy mayor was the police chief who arrested people who were nonviolently marching for Black Lives Matter, and then came out as a Republican and came out as a Trump-loving Republican. Maybe he never talked to his deputy mayor, and he didn't know what his deputy mayor thought about anything. But I would hope that those conversations were held and bad things happened. I think we're going to take a break.
Yeah.
And
You're talking about James Craig.
Yes, you know who I'm talking
Yes.
about, James Craig. We'll take a break. We have a couple other issues to go over, just a couple. One of them is TV ads.
Yes,
and
we
then
got
I want
some
to
new
talk about
ads.
Juneteenth. I do want
Yes.
to talk about some of those U.S. Senate TV ads because those are spicy.
Let's do it.
We'll be right back.
Interested in renting space for corporate events, meetings, conferences, social events, or resource fairs? The Stoudemire Wellness Hub and Mash Detroit Small Business Hub are available for rental by members, residents, businesses, and organizations. We offer rentals for activities such as corporate events, social events, meetings, conferences, art classes, fitness classes, and more. To learn more about our rentals and reserve space, visit ecn-detroit.org/space rental.
Okay, we're back talking about TV ads for U.S. Senate.
Yes.
It looks like Haley Stevens.
Yes,
had
Haley has a
some-
couple ads. And if you
Yes.
guys have been following me on Twitter, you know that I have been tweeting about how effective those ads have been. I've been talking to community members, my neighbors, people at barbershops and whatnot. Yeah. People today at the senior home, I asked them if they knew any of the Senate candidates. They only knew Haley Stevens.
Yeah.
These TV ads that Haley is running, framing herself as a champion against, in opposition to ICE, says that she's going to hold ICE accountable, and also standing up to President Trump, who is not very popular in Detroit among Democratic voters in Michigan. And so these TV ads, which are paid for by not AIPAC itself, but sort of AIPAC offshoots. That's the pro-Israel lobby, the biggest one in the world. They're very effective. And without TV ads on behalf of Mallory McMurrow, she's the state senator running in the middle of Haley and Abdul El-Sayed. He's the former Wayne County and Detroit health director. Without ads of their own, Haley, she could, on name ID alone. She's already there, not the incumbent, but she's in Congress already. And so people are going to be familiar with her, and the strategy that she's using is just so effective. We've seen it work.
With a target audience.
Yes.
With a target audience.
Yes.
She'll get people in senior homes and some older people in barbershops. A lot of younger, more progressive voters are not buying into her because of AIPAC. And I think even her cynical framing of those Barack Obama commercials really
That's what I was thinking. Yes,
pissed
Obama
me off. It made me so angry because
is in the commercials with her. Yes, she helped out with the auto rescue in 2008.
She worked for Obama.
Yes, and Obama has said kind things about Haley Stevens in the
He
past.
has, but he has
not
not
in the
endorsed
capacity
her.
of this campaign.
He has not endorsed her, and I think it's very cynical to use somebody who has not endorsed you to help justify your campaign. And yet I know it will work with some people. I think that the reality, it will backfire with others, though, because there's a certain type of voter who is not that in love with that. I think the other issue with Haley Stevens and also with Justin Owenu is that there is this not so subtle effort to push black voters away from Arab American voters. There's an anti-Arab. Lamar Lemons wrote an op-ed that said, well, look, some of, and I'm paraphrasing, somebody can correct me, but I think it went something like this. Abdul El-Sayed has some good policies, but Arab American people have not been good to black people, and therefore we should not trust them or something like that. And they need to be accountable. And I think group accountability is very interesting when applied to other groups of people. But it's interesting to me because I wonder if in his eyes, white women have actually been better to black people than Arab American people. There is this way of holding other ethnic minorities accountable for the behavior of some that we don't apply to white folks. And it's all of us do that, whether it's Mexican people applying it to some black people become all black people, or, you know what I mean? There's this internal racism, internalized racism that directs us and targets us against each other.
Yeah.
And so Keith Williams wrote something very similar, I know exactly similar, attacking Abraham Aish in favor of Justin Owenu. And my question is whether or not these ads seeking to cleave young black voters from Arab candidates will work in Michigan better than it worked in New York City.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about people like Lamar Lemons. He has long been railing against Arabs. I'm on an Alan Langle from 2020. It started with Lamar Lemons, chief of staff for a state senator, railing on Facebook earlier this month, accusing Chaldean business owners of taking advantage and profiting from Detroit's black community. We do know that happens. I mean, and that's, we do know that people exploit and take advantage of, but that doesn't mean the individual.
But the thing is that what we do know is that Chaldean store owners are stereotyped in that manner.
Right.
What we do know is the stereotype.
And we can't move. It's so hard for some people to move past those stereotypes.
But just like it's hard to say, some black men gangbang.
Yeah.
Okay? And some people see a black man who looks a certain way and say, well, just most of them do, or this is my image of them. When we have an image of a people that they are bad, then we have a way of justifying negativity towards those people. And it really bothers me that a people who have been so stereotyped and marginalized based on all of this stuff are willing to do it to other people. And I think we just need to stop. That sure, there are people who do bad things, and there are people who don't do bad things. And we should not make one person accountable for the actions of another human being. We should evaluate them on their actions.
And I'm hearing a lot of misinformation as it relates to specifically Abdul Al-Sayed, who 2 days after Kamala Harris announced that she would be the Democratic candidate for president, he endorsed her and took some heat from his own community for doing so.
Yeah.
And so, yes, Abdul did endorse uncommitted, and there will be people that feel a way about that. They'll say that uncommitted led to abandon Biden/Harris. Those are completely two different groups, led one by progressive socialists.
I was uncommitted.
And one was led by conservative Republicans.
Right. I was uncommitted, okay? I felt like we didn't have a choice. I felt like Biden should not have run again. I'm just being, you have to...
A lot of people in uncommitted felt that way, too.
Like
it was more than just the war in Gaza.
It was the war in Gaza. It's that you shouldn't run again. It's a whole lot of things. And so what's the point of voting for somebody who has no choice but to win?
He was running unopposed.
The uncommitted vote was to influence public policy.
Yes, and it was not, I don't think, to elect Donald Trump. And a lot of the people in our community are saying that was the point of uncommitted.
Sure,
and they're mistaking abandoned Biden/Harris with uncommitted that was led by progressive Democrats.
And there are people who mistake loyalty for justice. I'm so loyal to this person that I won't hold them accountable for something I don't like. This groupthink loyalty where we all have to support this one person because they've been good to us. Sometimes they have and sometimes they haven't. By the way, I came out with a new book. Did I tell you about this? The Black Detroit Democracy Handbook.
Oh, yes.
It came out. I finally decided I'm just going to do it, right? We can't build power by this kind of blind loyalty to somebody just because they've been good to us. You can be good to me and I can still disagree with something that you've done and want you to change and demand that you change. You're not good to me because we're friends. Politically speaking, it is something that you're doing. And if you change, I can hold you accountable. And I think as we look at really building power, we have to get off of this idea that if you ever didn't support Kamala Harris or said anything about her, that means you hate black women. If you ever did not support Biden, that means you hate Democrats. The reality is that the Gaza war, the war on Palestinians, the genocide that has taken place, is a divisive issue. And in my thinking, it shouldn't be divisive. Nobody should want to see people killed at that level. But it's really hard. And then I think Abdul also had a podcaster who some people say is anti-Semitic on his radio show or something like. Or no, he appeared with him in public appearances, and therefore he should not be allowed. How many people, and I'm serious, how many people running for office have allowed a racist person to stand up next to them? How come there are not litmus tests where racist people are disqualifying? But there are litmus tests that if somebody makes anti-Jewish statements, that makes them disqualifying. I'm not approving it. It just feels as though Jesse Jackson made one comment about Hymietown and his presidential candidacy was ruined forever. At some point, we have to stop saying that you can't say mean things about this one group or you'll be ruined forever. People can say all kinds of things about Arab American people and not be ruined forever. Because, after all, it's common sense that they're bad. It's common sense that they're terrorists. It's common sense they hate black people. We allow certain stereotypes to be so common in our culture that we don't fight those, we fight others. And so I just think it's a problem. And I wanted to say something about that. Before we leave, though, I do want to talk about Juneteenth.
Yes, we have a holiday coming up.
Yes.
What is going on June 18th, I understand, here at ECN?
Yeah. Well, Juneteenth is a holiday for us.
Yes.
And it's where we go out and we go to other people's Juneteenth events, but it is a holiday that we celebrate and honor our ancestors by saying, let's be off. But Juneteenth is a day of celebration. It is a day when the Union Army arrived in Texas, I forget the name of the regiment, to enforce the freedom of people who were enslaved. The way it gets framed is this is when they found out they were free. Like, if you're working on a plantation somewhere and somebody says you're free, you're like, cool, I'm out. That's not the way it works, right? You have to be allowed to leave. And there were many, many people who tried to leave after the Emancipation Proclamation, after the war had been won, and were killed or held hostage, because people who hold other people as property don't necessarily give up their property without a fight. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to understand the significance of that Army regiment going through the state of Texas and freeing people. The interesting thing is that is not the date that the last of all people who were enslaved were freed. Mm-hmm. People were not freed all through the United States until the adoption of the 13th Amendment on December 6th in 1865. Two states continued to hold people enslaved, Delaware and Kentucky. Do you know why?
Why is that?
Because they were not part of the Confederacy. Mm. And so what the Emancipation Proclamation did was it freed people in Confederate states. What the 13th Amendment did was it freed people everywhere. Now, we can acknowledge that 13th Amendment freed people incompletely because it said except for those who don't commit crimes. We can acknowledge there are some people who are still incarcerated and enslaved in prisons across the United States of America, working for slave wages and forced labor. But the 13th Amendment, December 6th, is also a day I think we should also try to remember to celebrate that day, because that is the final day of slavery, legal slavery in the United States. Mm.
What is going on June 18th, Donna?
Well, I'm really excited about this. I'm excited because it was not even my idea. But, for those of you who don't know, I wrote a book, Divining Freedom, with this idea that we have been pursuing freedom as African Americans in the United States of America since we landed on these shores. And when Black people moved up north during the Great Migration, there was this thinking, finally, we can be free. And so this book traces people leaving the Jim Crow South to be free in Detroit, and then finding out their obstacles to freedom in Detroit. And those obstacles shape shift over time into the present. And I think it's safe to say that freedom is still incomplete. Now, am I saying that anybody in the city of Detroit is as unfree as their ancestors were in slavery? Absolutely not. But am I saying that freedom is relative, citizenship is relative, and there are still people fighting for rights that are routinely denied, that American citizenship does not grant people things equally? So at any rate, that was the theory behind the novel. And our team put together a day, which I'm really honored to say was also themed Divining Freedom, where the idea is let's talk to people and let people tell their own stories about freedom. Let's talk to elders and let them talk about that. Let's talk to young people about what does freedom mean to us. We're going to have movies. We're going to have storytelling. We're going to have a cooking class by Miss Gail, I believe. We're going to do a number of things that do more than just celebrate Juneteenth, but really get us thinking about what it means to be free. Because none of us is free until we're all free. The fight continues. And that's one of the themes that we want to continue. And then we want to also make sure people have an accurate understanding of what Juneteenth is. And we want to claim it as a holiday, not because the federal government made it a holiday, but as a holiday that has been celebrated in the tradition of Black communities across the United States and is now being recognized as a federal holiday.
Yes. I want to remind everybody, too, I think I'm going to be at Hart Plaza on part of the day. On Friday, there's a concert going on with a bunch of local artists. The people putting that together are very proud. And so, I plan to be at a number of events on Friday all across the city. I know there's events happening at Rouge Park, Spirit Plaza, as well as down there, as I mentioned, at Hart Plaza. Juneteenth, I wrote about it on Michigan Chronicle. Sylvia Santana and Helena Scott were central to making Juneteenth a bank and, what is the other? Bank and sort of day off holiday, I guess. What is the other institution that closes banks and
It's just a federal
government?
holiday. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so this, holiday, I think it is important to remember, Donna, that without the racial justice movement of 2020, it's not, maybe in our, communities, but as a broader holiday that we all are observing, that momentum really only happened because of the 2020 racial justice movement. Would you agree?
Well, I think that it certainly helped push things over the line. There are people who fought for many years before that. I think that the only concern I have is the commercialization and the taking the meaning out of it. Juneteenth is a day of remembrance. It's a day of celebration, but it is more than just, yay, this is a day off. It's a holiday. And so it's important to me that we honor institutions that are connected to the freedom struggle, and that we never forget people. Let people forget what the freedom struggle is. There's certain things I know that were taught to me by my grandparents. My grandparents were born in the 1890s. My grandmother was born in 1898. My grandfather in 1899. They were 2 generations out. Okay, and they brought those stories to me, and we need to make sure that people don't lose that information. Because it is, that cultural learning that sometimes gets lost when we assimilate. And so my concern about Juneteenth is that it loses its meaning. But hats off to the young people in 2020. I was very proud of you. Be on the front lines fighting for me. I thought it was a brave thing. And I think that people who are young don't always get credit for the fights that you have waged around our freedom. It's almost as though all the fighting stopped, or the good fighting stopped in 1960s, and now you guys are just doing it the wrong way. But you're right. A lot happened into the year 2020. A lot of narratives were reworked, and it was very threatening to the powers that be, such that we now have the pushback that we have now.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank you guys for listening in. We want to remind you that if you have topics that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, please do hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or visit our website, authentically-detroit.com. I want to do shout-outs. Donna, You have anybody to shout out?
I do. I want to shout out Dr. Carol Gregory, who passed away, I believe it was last week. Dr. Gregory was a hero of mine. I actually went to middle school and high school with his daughter, Sheila. And so I didn't know who he was when I was a kid. He was just the father, you know. As an adult, I came upon his scholarship. I learned about his work with the Northern High School walkout. And when the students at Northern High School demanded a better education, he set up a freedom school for them when he was a professor at Wayne State and put everything on the line. I learned that he helped set up Detroit's first black bank, First Independence Bank. And, you know, I saw him just a couple years ago. He was young until he wasn't. Just a man for the ages, a brilliant economist, a person who was as passionate about social justice all through his life, even as he was moving into economic development spaces. So I just want to say we lost a giant in Dr. Gregory. And I will always appreciate his scholarship. True story. I was working at Vanguard, and he came by to visit at Vanguard Community Development Corporation. I read this book about the rise and fall of Detroit public schools, and that's when I learned about his work in the school. So he came to visit, and I showed him this passage in the book, and I said, "This is where I learned about what you did." And he had never seen the book, so I let him read it, and he held on to it and felt guilty for about 10 years because he hadn't seen me, because he hadn't given me back my book. And so he gave it back to me 10 years later. I wanted to give it back to me, and I said, "No, please keep it. This was for you." Yeah.
I want to shout out my mom, who is here for me always. Yeah. That's all, Mom.
Yes.
Appreciate you. Please do hit us up at Authentically Detroit. We want to thank you guys for tuning in and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices with real people here in the city of Detroit. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.